Survival horror, a genre that plays on the most primal of emotions, fear. One of the first survival horror games that made the big break was Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1. And after Resident Evil's release, it gave birth to a plethora of different survival horror games that came trying to imitate and trying to cash off the success of what was Resident Evil at the time. It gave birth to some legendary horror games as well, such as Silent Hill, and later down the line we had games like Dead Space. But of course there were always those smaller titles that never got the attention and were just left there and no one really looked at them. Thanks to the sudden rise of indie games, especially in the last decade, many titles that are being developed by smaller studios and even individual developers, a lot of games are getting the love they deserve, and we are also getting some fantastic games that are being brought into the limelight. Everything that Resident Evil did only amplified the horror and the scare factor of the entire game. The jankiness, the limited inventory space, the slow tanky movements, everything was just absolutely phenomenal, and it was something that really scared people and still scares people to this day. What Silent Hill did was completely different in the sense of the plot and its exposition. Silent Hill played on the more psychic side. It was scary down to its roots. It proposed ideas that were terrifying to even consider, and it had a story that gripped the player down to the very end of the game. This gave birth to a new style of survival horror that impacted an entire generation and still keeps impacting multiple generations of horror games that are coming out and that have come out already. Storytelling of this caliber was not common in gaming at that time, and it made way for developers to recognize and understand that gaming can be used as a medium to explore incredibly complex plots. A lot of the people still enjoy that tank control goodness, and it is very much appreciated, especially in the indie side of things. And so, I finally got around to playing Signalis. If you're going to look at Signalis, you're going to think to yourself, what's really going on? Because the game does not hold your hand with storytelling. You have to actually understand what's going on through various diary entries that are littered throughout the game. As you progress through the story, you start to see what's actually going on. The plot is very cosmic horror, very vague, and very cool. I see tons of nods to Silent Hill, especially Silent Hill 2, and the gameplay is pretty much right out of the first few Resident Evil games, like the first 3 Resident Evil games. The art style is very cool. It goes with the low poly PS1 aesthetic, but it also has that little bit of high quality pixel art, especially with the small cutscenes that are littered throughout. Very cool. Also, the good part about this game is that I did not find it as hard as I did find the first few Resident Evil games. Like, those games are really hard to get into, and if you're a huge fan of survival horror, that's one of the few circumstances you're gonna enjoy the game under. I used to say to start with Silent Hill 2, but Silent Hill is also pretty janky because it's a product of its time. So far, the story is concerned for Signalis, really well written, but that's just a really broad brushstroke. The way the story goes is that you are Elster, a replica. A replica is basically an android counterpart of a real human, and you are looking for a woman whose picture you have in the ship you wake up in. That's how the game starts. I'm not gonna go further deeper into it because I want you to feel and see the story for yourself and really know what this entire game is all about. That's how much I really like this game. That's how much I really like the story and writing. There are no flaws in the story writing as far as I saw and witnessed for myself. And it paces really nicely. The pacing of the entire game is fantastic. It's not really over welcoming its stay, and it's not being annoying. It's not being really lengthy and really explanatory with its things. Quite the contrary, the game does not explain a lot of things, and the player has to put the pieces together to make sense of the story. And that's what I really like. This game does not hold your hands at all. The in-game hints are very, very much grounded in the game's universe. Nothing and nothing at all breaks your immersion. I really like this because they took these cues from Dead Space. You know, like in Dead Space, there's writings on the wall that says, like, you have to cut their limbs off.
Isaac, be careful. Shooting them in the body didn't seem to work. Go for the limbs. Dismember them. That should do the job.
Of course, as you progress through the story, you understand what world you are in and what cosmic horror awaits you. And speaking of cosmic horror, this game is so tasteful when it comes to cosmic horror, because I am a huge fan. I'm a huge cosmic horror fan. The way this game pulls it off is very tasteful. Also, the game heavily focuses on individuality. Like, as you progress through the game, you are introduced to these concepts and you have to kind of understand what's really going on. The game starts to peel the layers of the plot onion and you start to understand what's actually going on. There are some flaws that I'd like to point out in game. Nothing major, but still, they are there. The way the weapons are given is very low-key, and there's no build-up to it. If you have played the old Resident Evil games, you would find that, the shotgun is on some sort of puzzle, and you have to solve that puzzle to get the shotgun, and it's really satisfying to get it. But in Signalis, the weapon is either just there or really hidden, so much so that maybe you might not even find it. That I found a little odd. The other thing that I found a little odd was that there are some items that are a bit too abundant in the game. It does make the entire playthrough a lot easier, especially for casual players. I do find that it may make the experience a little too easy for hardened and more experienced survival horror players. The last bit of criticism that I have for this game is that the boss fights, excluding the final boss fight, were too normal. They weren't built up. No build up whatsoever. They did not feel intense. The first boss fight kind of had me scared, like, oh my god, there's going to be a boss. This guy's going to be hard. But the second boss fight, though the design was really cool and the way it was executed was also pretty cool, it wasn't special. It wasn't special at all. It did not have any sort of puzzle that you had to solve mid-fight. The final boss fight was really well done, and it's a really easy loop, but of course, it's pretty nice and actually requires you to put some mind into it. The soundtrack of Signalis and the sound design overall of the game is phenomenal. The soundtrack will have you feeling absolutely serene, or it will evoke some kind of emotion from you, or it will have you be incredibly tense. The soundtrack in some places is so tense, you can't help but be on your toes. It's that good. The sound design is incredible and the weapons sound very punchy. You can actually feel the power of each weapon. It's not overbearing, but it's enough to make you feel like you shot something. And that is exactly the kind of feedback you want from a survival horror weapon. It is the perfect feedback. The game is not really the longest one either. The average run for Signalis takes about 9 hours, and I'm sure if you want to experience something that's really well written, 9 hours just come right out of nowhere, because these 9 hours are worth it. These 9 hours are so worth it. The game also offers some form of replayability because this game has 5 endings. So if you want to see and find every single ending of the game, you have to finish this game 5 times. That's a lot of replayability, and especially for the price, this is a great game. And that's basically it. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave it a little like, leave a suggestion for what game you want to see on this channel, what game you want to be reviewed. If you want to see more content like this, leave a little subscription. See you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in.